Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, my name is Kate Stricklan. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Application Review at the University of Colorado Boulder. I live in Boulder with my family, which includes a fifth grader and a freshman in high school.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good afternoon, friends. And thanks to all of you, by the way, who asked me about my daughter Joy, who was trapped in Grenada. I shared that with you last Monday. Well, she was supposed to leave Grenada last Saturday. Fortunately, she was able to get home by Tuesday night and start at work on Wednesday. And she's pretty ecstatic because she works at UNC Chapel Hill with the Keenan Flagler Business School, and they just moved into a brand new $195 million state-of-the-art building called the Stephen Bell Hall. And she ended up getting one of the larger offices, so don't feel that sorry for her. By the way, if you have been frustrated with how hard it is to get into Keenan Flagler, UNC's business school, these new facilities are allowing them to grow the size of their undergraduate business degrees by 50%, so it should be easier to get in. Now, I was talking to Joy earlier in the week, and I said, we have some podcast listeners who have kids at UNC. Can they stop by and see you? And she was like, absolutely. Now, of course, she primarily works with the business students. She does counseling, she helps with wellness, and she takes international trips with them. But the brand new Tom Keenan Cafe is open to all students, and it is in the business building. So everybody should be over in this brand new business building on the South Campus. So yeah, stop by and say hi to Joy if you get a chance. Friends, thanks to every one of you who sends an email, a text every now and then to me. I've often said to myself, why am I so happy every time I come on here to record a podcast? Why am I so happy to meet with you? And it's honestly because of the communication that I have with listeners through the week. It just fires me up. And you guys truly are the wind beneath my wings. And I've thought about it. Like, would I even be doing episode 604 if I'd never, ever heard from a listener ever? I don't think so. Because as much as I, like this college admissions terrain, and it's kind of an understatement. I'm really a junkie, to be honest with you. I could talk about it all day. But nobody likes whistling in the wind out here by themselves. So, yeah, it's really my interaction with you guys that makes me so excited to come meet with you guys twice a week. Friends, our sign-up sheet is up for our South Florida gathering. That's Thursday, February 19th, 6 to 7:30 p.m., and that is at American Heritage School's Broward Campus Building. That's 12200 West Broward Boulevard, Plantation, Florida. A Q&A session, small presentation, and light refreshments. We'd love to see you there. Hope you'll sign up. Just go to Your College Bound Kid, hit the events tab. It's the first thing at the top of the page. Now let's talk about today's episode. So I'm continuing a series I started last week where I speak out on some important topics that I feel I may not have been as clear in the past in my communication. And I want to try to provide some clarity on exactly what I believe. So today's topic is selectivity. And this is something I've wanted to talk to you guys about in a whole monologue like this for years. Literally for years, I wanted to address this topic. So I'm a little hyped today. It may seem like I'm over caffeinated, but it's not that. I'm not really a big caffeine person. I'm just excited about this topic and an opportunity to share some things that have been on my heart. And then after we talk about selectivity, I'm also excited about my interview with Kate Stricklan. It's really a conversation. Kate from CU Boulder, is back, and we're mostly going to talk about how CU Boulder shapes their class after the initial admissions decisions are rendered. We cover a couple other topics as well. All right, friends, let's dive in. The first thing I want to say is that I'm only speaking for myself. Every co-host has their own perspective, so what I say today, please attribute it only to me. Now, if you've listened to me for a while on Your College-Bound Kid, you've heard me say things like, I think it's a mistake to judge a college by its acceptance rate. I think it's a mistake to assume more selective equals better. I think if you impose an arbitrary number, let's say 80%, I've got to only look at schools that accept less than 80%. And you say that to yourself, those are the only schools I'm going to look at, schools that have admit rates under 80% or 50% or 30% or whatever your number is. I have decried that. I have repeatedly decried that. I have repeatedly said that if you do this, you're going to miss out on some real gems. However, my fear is that when I make statements like that, the way they may be interpreted is the selectivity of the institution your student chooses to attend is not important. And I actually do not believe that. I actually think the selectivity of the institution your student selects is very important. Now, when I interviewed Daniel Chambliss, author of the book How College Works, this was one of the main findings from their research. Who your kid is around in college matters. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. My head is spinning because this feels like a contradiction. How can you reconcile saying selectivity is important or even very important, who your child is around matters, while simultaneously encouraging us not to judge a college by its acceptance rate? I can reconcile them because I do not believe selectivity and acceptance rates are the same thing. Let me repeat that. I can reconcile those two truths because I do not believe selectivity and acceptance rate are the same thing. Now, I'm going to share with you 5 reasons I do not believe acceptance rate and selectivity are tantamount to the same thing. The first reason is one I've mentioned before, so I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly. Acceptance rates are very easily manipulated, and I'm going to tell you 6 ways this is easily done. One is partially completed apps, counting them as an app. Second is an inducement to make it super easy to apply. An inducement to make it super easy to apply. So examples are things like Snap apps. It's been a while since we've talked about Snap apps, so you might not know what I'm talking about if you're a newer listener. Snap apps are like forms you get in the mail. They're almost like postcards, and everything's really almost all completed for you. And normally there's an enticement, like you are one of the top applicants we've seen, and we're waiving app fees, and all you need to do is, basically sign here, and we'll consider an application. That's an overstatement, but like there's zero work, like minimal work. Like you can do everything in under a minute, right? So that's Snap apps. No essays, fee waivers, just making it so easy to apply. You're going to drive your apps up. Recruiting to reject, using things like student search to target such a broad range of students, many who are going to be inadmissible. So you drive your apps up through all of these things. You're accepting a finite amount. You drive your admit rate down. Yield protection. This is a really big one. For those of you who are new and don't know what that is, that has to do with colleges using your engagement scoring and tracking and demonstrated interest to figure out who they think is going to come or who has a high probability of coming. And then those are the people that you admit. And it doesn't matter how strong an applicant is. If they haven't demonstrated a sufficient level of engagement, you pass over them. And by the way, I want to make this crystal clear. A lot of these things that I'm sharing here, ways in which schools lower their admit rates, nothing is wrong with them. I used many of these things, most of them, to be honest with you, when I was in admissions. They're not wrong. They're just tactics that schools use. So you need to know that when you see an admit rate, you can't count on it. It's a statistics that's very, very easily manipulated. So that's what we mean by yield protection, right? And there's many good reasons for schools to do that, by the way, which I won't get into. That's a whole other conversation. I can go over the good reasons why it makes sense for colleges to do that. That'd be a whole other separate conversation. All right, next one, high use of ED. I was just looking at some numbers from 2026. Numbers, schools like Columbia and Emory. I mean, these schools are now coming in at more than 2 and 3 spots going to ED. So what does that mean? It means large masses. I mean, the overwhelming number of your applicants by far are going to come in outside of ED because people don't feel they can commit without seeing the price tag, and because people haven't been able to do enough research on all the schools that they're comfortable committing to a school, or they may just not have a school that stands out, or, could be lots of reasons. They're curious where else they're going to get in. But for many, many reasons, the overwhelming number of your applicants are going to come in not through ED, but if the overwhelming number of applicants are coming in through us and they're only vying for 1/3 of the spots, obviously your admit rate's going to be really low. Next reason, there's a massive disparity at a lot of places between the admit rates for international students and domestic students. That's extremely common. I know a school that claims an admit rate in the 30s, and that's not like it's inaccurate, but they told me that they have a 2% admit rate for internationals because they get crazy number of international applicants and they don't give financial aid there. And those applicants oftentimes need money. So their domestic admit rate is in the mid-80s. And when it comes to yield protection, I know of a school that claims an admit rate in the 30s, but they're giving $20,000 of merit money to everybody with a 2.75 GPA. Now, if you can give $20,000 of merit money to encourage a student to come with a 2.75 GPA, I doubt you're really truly only admitting 1 and 3 if you were admitting them based off of who was qualified, right? You're admitting them based off of who you think is likely to come. So for all of those reasons, admit rates cannot be trusted. And so when I say selectivity matters, that does not mean use acceptance rate as a gauge for that. All right, let's move on to the second reason. The second reason selectivity is so much broader than how hard it is to get into a school is because selectivity involves, will I find people who share my values? Boy, that's important. I got to repeat it. Selectivity involves, will I find people who mesh with my values? Now, I'm going to share 3 examples here. 2 are going to be from boarding school and 1's going to be from college. So I've been doing this 26 years, but 8 of those years I was in a boarding school, 01 to 09. So I have a lot of boarding school examples. It's the same thing. Academic, residential community. It's the same principles. So I worked at the Westtown School, a Quaker boarding school, 25 miles west of Philly. And our biggest rival was the other large Quaker boarding school in the country, George School. It's about 30 miles away. So we often had a lot of overlap with that school. So sorry, Westtown School lovers. I got to kind of use an example that makes George School look good here, but it's all good, right? Got to show them some love. Now, there's another boarding school. There's a couple boarding schools that are close to George School. George School's in Newtown, Pennsylvania. There's a couple boarding schools in the Princeton area. One's called Lawrenceville, one's called Petty. Both outstanding boarding schools. Been to each of them probably 5 times. And I've had kids go to these schools back. Before 2016, I used to do 50% boarding, 50% college in my placement. And I kind of flipped it 10 years ago to kind of go like 98.2 or 99.1 now. But, there was a long time I was sending a lot of kids I remember one year I sent 27 kids to boarding school. Anyway, let me stay focused, Doc. So I was talking to somebody at Lawrenceville. Now you have to understand, Lawrenceville is a member of what's called the 10 school group, which is basically the equivalent of the Ivy Leagues in college, right? 10 schools, they travel together. They've intentionally branded themselves as they're not the 10 most selective, just like the Ivy League are not the 8 most selective, but they are 10 of the most prestigious and historical, and they overlap, just very similar to the Ivy League in a lot of different ways. You see the parallels. So Lawrenceville's in the 10 school group. Very wealthy school, very, very well-resourced school. It's in the Princeton area. And I was talking to a Lawrenceville employee who I've known for a long time. And Lawrenceville has something that a lot of wealthier boarding schools do. They have a tuition remission program that says that if you don't want your student to come here, they can go to another boarding school and we'll cover 75% of the cost. So I'm having a conversation with an employee at Lawrenceville, and he says, I'm thinking about having my student go to the George School. Now, Lawrenceville's got the lower acceptance rate between George, right? So what was his reason? He said, and mind you, this is 20 years ago. He said, we just have too many kids here that are dropping more than $5,000 on the prom, driving around, sporting their fancy, expensive cars. And the George School just doesn't have the same culture of wealth to the same level. And I'm just not sure if that's the environment I want my student in. Now, I don't say this to disparage Lawrenceville. Lawrenceville is fantastic in so many ways. But the point is this. The parent was talking about values selectivity. He was talking about selectivity, but it wasn't based off admit rate. It was based off an alignment with the family values. Okay, I'm going to give another. Cannot believe I'm giving this much love to George. I used to love competing against them back in the day. Petty, the other, boarding school in Heightstown, 8 miles away from Lawrenceville. Also more selective than George, also wealthier than George, lower admit rate than George. And I was talking to a couple people I've known for 20 years who are married, and they actually left George to go work at Petty. And I was having a conversation with them. And they were like, Petty's great in so many ways, but Petty doesn't have the soul that George has. George has soul. George has a value set and a core set of beliefs that people rally around. Once again, the point being selectivity based on values. I'm going to give you a third example. I'll throw a college one in there. I was working with a student a few years ago in the Rocky Mountain region, and he was having a hard time trying to decide between Pitzer and Pomona. I mean, he went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. These are two selective schools in the Claremont colleges, Claremont, California, 35 miles from LA. And this student was hardcore into environmental activism. He actually visited both schools twice. And he came away saying, Pitzer's got more people like me. They've got more people that are environmental activists, environmental warriors about environmental justice. And I recently did a session with him, just checking in and seeing how he's doing. And he absolutely loves Pitzer. He said, I'm so glad I made the decision to pick Pitzer. Of course, the nice thing about the Claremonts is you can still take courses at Pomona because all 5 Claremonts are on 1 square mile. But the point is, it was a values alignment. So the second reason why selectivity and admission rate are not just the same is because selectivity is about finding people who are aligned with your values. And some schools will have students more aligned with your values than others. The third reason why acceptance rates are really not a gauge of selectivity is because they don't speak to which college has the best program in your area of interest. Now, I'm going to start by using an example that some of you have heard if you're regular listeners. I had Dan LaChance on from Rochester Institute of Technology. Okay? Dan could have gone to many schools that had lower admit rates than Rochester Institute of Technology. In fact, I remember when I first started working with Dan, Brown was one of the schools that was under initial consideration. And then Maryland and a bunch of others, they had lower admit rates than RIT. But you can put RIT cybersecurity program up against any of them. And it allowed Dan to be one of the 1% of people who got a Microsoft internship and hired by Microsoft, right? Strength of program. Obviously, that's not the only factor. He had a lot of personal qualities. He did a lot of things. But the strength of the cybersecurity program, a club with over 200 people that he's president, certainly looked amazing on his resume. I'll give you another example. If I have a student interested in peace and conflict studies, it's indisputable that George Mason has one of the top programs in the country. I mean, the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School is one of the only universities in the entire country with an entire school, not a department, dedicated to peace and conflict studies. And when it comes to the whole focus on conflict analysis, many people look at George Mason as the gold standard in the country. But what's the acceptance rate at George Mason? 87.5%. I could give example after example after example of colleges that have one of the top programs in the nation, but have high acceptance rates. You know what? Let me give you one more. Oklahoma is considered the top program in the country for meteorology by most people. Its program is literally housed inside the National Weather Center, a $69 million 244,000 square foot facility. Students attend class in the same building that houses the NOAA Storm Prediction Center. They issued tornado watches for the entire country there. They also share a space with the National Severe Storms Laboratory. Now, OU spends more federal and state research money on weather than MIT or any other school. Why? Well, Norman, Oklahoma is the heart of Tornado Alley. What's OU's acceptance rate? 77%. So if you wanted to be a meteorologist, but you started out with the filter, I'm only going to look at schools that admit less than 75%, you wouldn't look at OU. And so I just want to point out why I don't think selectivity acceptance rate are the same thing. All right, the fourth reason is because many schools have programs and living arrangements that allow the top students to live together. Look at honors colleges. There's some honors colleges that are at schools that are not that difficult to get into, but the honors college is brutally difficult to get into. I mean, look at this. Look at Penn State University, in their main campus. State College, University Park. I mean, it's really not that difficult to get in. I know for engineering it is, and it can be, but for the most part, it's really not that hard to get into. But getting into the Schreier's Honors College, are you kidding me? That's brutal. They take like 1 out of every 17 kids. So you can't use selectivity as a gauge there because you're in a community. If you get into an honors college like that, most of them have honors dorms. You're living with honors students. You take honors only in classes, not exclusively, but many of them, and many other perks. I could use Barrett at ASU. I could use South Carolina. There's many, many schools I could give where the disparity between their honors college and their average kid to get in is substantial. So that's another reason. Also, many colleges have living learning communities. Okay, so you're living and learning. You want to learn the language of French really well, you're on a French-only floor. Now, these living learning communities, they kind of combine selectivity, because a certain kind of kid is pretty academically focused, chooses to do this most of the time, with a major and your value set. You get to be aligned with people who think like you think. So you're going to have a great experience most of the time. That's a selective environment, even if the school itself doesn't have a low admit rate. Then you have the schools that have special programs like the mentored undergraduate research. Sure, places like Princeton have that, uber selective, but College of Worcester has that. Other schools like Allegheny in Pennsylvania, Occidental in LA, Reed, selective, but not Princeton selective. That experience is going to be unbelievable. And actually, when you look at the data of students that go on to get PhDs, the most in different fields, it really does not correlate with the most selective institutions in the country. Like, you'll see places like Bryn Mawr and Reed frequently in the top 5 in the country, especially for where females go on to get PhDs in the sciences, right? So you have a special program and it attracts a certain kind of kid. And once again, you can't gauge that by selectivity. Or you have a program like the Johnson Center for Integrative Studies. This is at Redlands. I absolutely love this program. 200 students. It's basically like a large LLC, 2 dorms. I was so impressed when I visited there twice now in the last 4 years. You design your own major. That program's been around since 1969 when they had their 50-year reunion. Thousands of people came back. They were so impacted at a school with very modest admit rate. So once again, those are examples. Now, the 5th reason is just simply this. Most of the time, you're going to hang around about 6 people in college. And every college has smart kids. Every college just has smart kids. You're going to have your group, your tribe, 6 to 8. Maybe if you're really social, it's 10 to 12. And you can find smart kids. They're just there. All right, so let's do a recap. What are the 5 reasons why selectivity and acceptance rates are not the same thing? First, acceptance rates are easily manipulated. Second, selectivity in terms of values alignment is arguably the most important type of selectivity. And you can find selectivity by values is not the same thing as selectivity by difficulty to get in based on things like transcript, GPA, test scores, totally different things. Third, some exceptionally strong programs are at schools that are often nestled in a college with a very high acceptance rate. Fourth, special programs colleges have that bring together highly motivated, high achievers, disciplined, focused, and they can become the peer group. And lastly, there's smart, ambitious, focused kids on every college campus. And your peer group may be 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, depending on how social you are. You can find those kids. And if you hang around those kids, they're going to rub off on you. Now, one of the people that's influenced my thinking the most is Jim Rohn. And it's not the guy who's got the sports show, who I find very entertaining for the last 30 years, Jim Rohn, R-O-M-E. It's Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N. And originally, Jim Rohn came up with this quote. And it simply said this: you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, since then, it's been adopted, and you've heard several variations. Like you'll hear people say, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Or show me your 5 closest friends, and I'll tell you who you are or who you'll be. And I believe in the research of Jim Rohn, by the way. It's based on a concept in sociology known as social contagion theory. And the theory is that the people that you're around, they act like a mirror, and they end up molding your behavior, just like a mirror may force you to kind of make changes based on what you see. And Rohn argued that the people you surround yourself, they influence you in 3 major ways. One is what he called the thought diet. And what this is what you talk about with your friends, what conversations you have, what ideas you grapple with, what you gossip about, what vocabulary you use, what level of ambition the group has. They end up influencing your own boundaries and your own aspirations. The next is what he referred to as self-belief. And basically what Rohn says here is, if you're around people who are optimistic and have a growth mindset and they're growth-oriented, they're going to pull you up. If they're cynical and critical and condescending, they're going to subconsciously drag down your expectations. And then the third thing is what he called the standard of excellence. And this is what he was referring to here. If your inner circle works hard, stays disciplined, that becomes the new norm. If they're complacent, you will too. And this applies to lots of things. It applies to people in your work environment. It applies to people in your neighborhood, in your family or extended family. And it certainly applies to a college. And this is basically what Dan Chambliss was talking about in the book, College Works, like when they did that 10-year research study on how college works. You know, he specifically made the point that the 5 students that you live with, whether you're on campus or off campus, in your dorm, who you hang out with, they're going to influence you. They're going to impact you. They're going to have an impact on who you are and who you end up being. So, friends, that's enough of selectivity. Hopefully, I made it clear today the difference between selectivity and acceptance rate, apples and oranges. Let's transition to my conversation with Kate Stricklan. We're looking at how colleges shape their class after they make initial admissions decisions.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, as promised, Kate Stricklan's back from CU Boulder. And this week we're talking about how colleges shape their class in admissions. And Kate tells us what shaping is and how it applies to admissions file reading. Kate talks about how students go in and out of the admitted class. Kate shares why colleges do not reveal certain things about their admit data to the public. Kate shares when you should not send your test scores to CU Boulder. Kate shares how the applicant pool differs by college and by in-state and out-of-state students. And Kate explains why they decided to have an in-state and a different out-of-state admissions notification date. And then I share why Georgia and Georgia Tech have made different notification dates for both in-state and out-of-state. Listen and enjoy. You know, I was reading through our survey the other day, and, you know, every time you read, there's hundreds of pages because we asked for comments, so it's really full of information. But somebody said something that hurt me a little bit because it's something I try not to do, but I really needed to hear it, which is, you know, I wish you guys wouldn't use so much like inside jargon. You know, sometimes it's hard to follow a conversation. So I'm trying to be really conscious of that. So can you explain to maybe a newer listener who's not familiar with shaping, what shaping is, and so they can understand what you meant by that?
Yeah. So when you shape a class, essentially it's math. So it's very likely if you have the great good fortune of being a university that has an abundance of applications, likely after your initial reading period, more students have been marked and recommended admit than their academic program has space for. And then at that point, you're looking at your data, like what the statistics are saying about how many you should admit versus how many seats you need to ultimately fill. So armed with that knowledge, that's when you have to make some tough decisions. And so and this is a big part of my role is I look at the entire applicant pool for a certain population of students, based on academics or tuition classification, and you have to start to make tough choices and move students in. Sometimes you see a diamond in the rough and you pull them up and you make sure that they get admitted or even directly admitted to their program of choice. But then there's going to ultimately be some students who get a more adverse decision. So maybe they get deferred, waitlisted, or even denied. So because we have such an abundance of applications, and that is a wonderful problem to have, that means we have to move more students out into decisions that they weren't hoping to get, just because it's a space game.
Yeah. So what Kate is saying practically, friends, for your student may mean that your student could get, let's say, a deferred decision if they applied in the early round. And they might have been admitted at one point. Like they may be completely admissible. At one point, the plan was to go out with an admission letter. And then when you look at the data, like I'll just make numbers up. So let's say you are looking to bring 250, people in for a particular, slot, major or whatever. And I'm keeping it really simple here. And let's say you have a 50% yield traditionally, meaning you'd need to admit 500 to get that 250. Then, if you've gone ahead and got 350 that you were, looking to, 700. 700, right? Because you're counting on getting half. Well, then you would say, well, we can't admit 700 because we could get 350 and we don't have spots for 250. So I get it that as readers, you thought that these 700 were admits, but now we need to go back and look, and we need to get that 700 down to 500 so that we can really get the 250 that we have allocated for. And that's based on all kinds of things, everything from how many faculty you have to space that you have. I mean, obviously you can't bring in unlimited people. So anything you want to add to that? Anything I didn't say?
That was perfect, Mark. Exactly. That's, that situation where, okay, we have 250 spots. We need to admit 500 to get those 250, but we have 700, means I have to do something with 200, even though they could be completely qualified in every way. That's when, those, like I've been saying, those tough decisions come in. But we don't do them lightly. They're, we take the utmost care, and we factor in many different things before moving students in or out.
Yeah, and I wanted to share that for two reasons. One, because I know we have a curious bunch who likes to know these kinds of things. But also, honestly, your student may have been admitted at one point if they were to get deferred, or the same thing could happen.
Yeah.
With wait lists, right? And it had nothing to, they clearly were admissible. Like the readers read, we want this kid here.
Yes. If you take away anything, listeners, from this conversation, don't assume if your student gets a deny that they immediately went into the deny pool. A lot of folks in the office could have been advocating for them till the very end, or they could have been incredibly admissible, and just things, just things happen.
Kate, this just got so interesting. This was originally going to be like a little 3-minute conversation. I do this though, because I feel like I know our listeners enough to have a sense of like the kinds of things that they find interesting. And you're the perfect person to talk to about this because you're over that role over the seasonals.
Yeah.
I do have another question. So, and maybe some people will go more into this, but we know, and this is one of the reasons why it's so great having you here as a flagship school that functions differently than a Conn college or a Colorado college in the role that major can play in who gets in, right? And so one of the things that students and parents often ask is, why won't that school tell me exactly what the admit rate is for every single major? Of course, not every school admits by major. Sometimes you're admitting by college. And this is where it gets tricky. Some schools admit by college, some admit by major, some admit by college, but they have a couple majors that are so super competitive. So there's a couple majors that it's major, even that it's normally college, right? It's like complicated. But you don't find very many people that share all of that data publicly. They might share some of it, but not all of it. So explain what goes into what you feel you can share with the public and what you don't feel you can share, and what's the reason why you feel you can't share the stuff that you don't share?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we lean pretty heavily into our public data points of the 50th percentile of admitted students based on GPA, ACT, SAT scores if they chose to submit those, because we're test optional. So if you go to our admissions website, you can find that. You can find a university-wide 50% middle range admitted student data, and then engineering, business, our communications and design program, and I think arts and science, I think maybe even education, they all have it broken out as well. So we do provide that, but you're right that we don't publicize our admit percentages. For those colleges, I think it's public knowledge. We're like last year, university-wide, we were 76% admit rate across all academics and all tuition categories. But we are more protective about the individual admit rates. I think because we don't want to discourage students from applying to those more selective programs. And I do think the data is pretty telling. Like if your test score does not fall in the very pretty incredible range of business and engineering, don't send it. Or if your GPA is way off, I think the subtext is there that it might be a risky choice to apply for. But
Kate, do you know what those are offhand for, say, business engineering versus any of them? I think it might make it more concrete if we can kind of share numbers. Like for example, this is our middle 50% here versus here. Is that something that you either know or you can pull up right away? I think it'll make it tangible.
I can. For instance, Leeds School of Business, our system works on weighted grades. We use weighted GPAs. So
Are
the middle.
Are you recalculating to come up with those weighted, or are you just going with what's on the transcript?
Currently, we use self-reported, what's on the transcript.
Mm-hmm.
So the middle 50th range for our business school is a 4.0 to a 4.37. The SAT is a middle range is 1390 to 1460 or 31 to 34 ACT. Engineering is a weighted GPAs of a 397 to a 442. SAT 1360 to 1500. So 1 in 4 of our engineers will have beyond a 1500 or 31 to 35 ACT. So these may be, I hope, not discouraging enough. I hope they're not too discouraging for students.
But the difference with, maybe arts and sciences or, just so people.
Oh, and then arts and sciences, yes. Mm-hmm. So that is a 3.67 weighted GPA up to a 4.19. SATs range from 1260 to 1440. if you choose to submit, or a 29 to 33. So you can really see kind of the range of selectivity very easily on our website to see where you might, if getting into CU Boulder is the most critical part of it for you, where you might find your best academic fit.
And does in-state or out-of-state play any role at all?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because we need to maintain certain ratios, but we actually get far more applications from out-of-state than in-state. So with more apps and fewer spots, it's necessarily a little bit more selective.
So would it be fair to say those averages would be a little different in state to out of state?
That's a good point. Yeah, they're not broken down by tuition classification. So yes, I would say that you are correct.
I've been trying to get more colleges to break that out. Some are leery to do it. I always like to shout out South Carolina. If you go on to South Carolina, and all this is public, it's on their website. Like when I looked last year, their in-state was a 21 to 29, middle 50%, and then out of state was significantly higher. Don't quote me on this, but I want to say 27 to 31 was the out of state versus the in-state. And then, of course, that also was reflected with GPA as well, just because. And they're a school that takes a significant out-of-state, percentage, but they want to make sure the in-state is at least over 51.
Mm-hmm.
Like it to be 60, but at least they kind of need to be at 51. And friends, sometimes this stuff comes down from the Board of Regents, Board of Governors. It's like state imposed. And then sometimes it's done on the initiative of the school. So I actually wanted to come back to something you said before, Kate. I was happy you're doing what you're doing now, which is having an in-state notification date versus out-of-state. Georgia started this a long time ago. Georgia Tech actually was the first school that I know that did it. And then after doing it for about 3 or 4 years, Georgia and Georgia Tech kind of got on the same page with doing it. And I think it makes sense for a lot of reasons. I'm sure it's the same reasons Georgia did it, but what were the reasons that you chose to go to that?
Yeah, I think one, we want to be a little bit more in line with our in-state peers. So a place like Colorado State, CSU, they have they have rolling admissions, so they have the ability to get decisions in hands pretty quickly. And we know that a lot of our in-state students ultimately are choosing between the two of us. So we want to make sure that our offer and the best offer that we can get to students is out there to give them the longest time to maybe apply for additional scholarships at CU, explore enrichment opportunities that they can use, that they can apply to enhance their admission, their offer, like maybe a leadership program or an honors program that would make attending CU even more exciting for them. So I think there's definitely like peer parity in the mix, but we also know that, there's something about that first flurry of decision letters that get to you that are very impactful. I remember the first place I got into college, and it gave me a really warm, fuzzy feeling. And it possibly puts you a little bit more in the mix because it's a very appreciative gesture. So for all those reasons, and that, the college decision period just seems to be more like occurring earlier and earlier in the cycle, like less so at the end of April. So we wanted to position ourselves best in the eyes of our residents.
And I'll speak for Georgia because I've had a chance to talk with both Rick Clark and David Graves about this, Georgia Tech and Georgia. A few things there. So Georgia is known in the world of admissions for getting notifications out very early. They were getting notifications out by mid-November for in-state and out-of-state at one point. And I mean, Rick's been very public about the fact that they saw themselves losing more and more kids to Georgia because it is an advantage to get an acceptance in someone's hand early. Like all of a sudden they can fully allow themselves to fall in love with you, because before you get that, your heart is kind of guarded to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So one reason that, Georgia Tech did it was to improve their yield directly head to head with Georgia. A couple other reasons why it happened here, and I predict this is going to be a growing trend, by the way. I think you're going to see more schools do it. Doesn't mean 30 states are doing it next year, but keep an eye in this space for those of you who are like really admissions nerds. So a couple of reasons why Georgia did it. One, when you have an increasing load of applications, the volume of reading, we've talked about it, is really, quite a challenge. And it allows you to get decisions out, earlier, because obviously that's a portion of apps you're in state. And in the case of Colorado, Kate's already said it, Georgia and Georgia Tech, they both get a lot more out of state than in state. So it's actually a smaller pool that you can decision, where before, if you were trying to decision everybody on the same day, like the volume of reading, that's even more of a challenge, right, to take that on. And so now you're portioning it up, breaking down your reading decisions into a smaller amount. It allows you to get some decisions out the door a little earlier. So that was one reason. Another reason why it happened here is, even so, Georgia and Georgia Tech are a little different, I think, Kate, in terms of like you can correct me if I'm wrong, and this may be changing because you guys are growing in apps, but there is a pretty big difference in acceptance rate between in-state and out-of-state for Georgia and Georgia Tech. Like, I was looking at Georgia's stuff, it's already out 45% in-state, 22% out-of-state. Georgia Tech is down into the teens out-of-state, which Georgia might be next year there. They're 22 now. And Georgia Tech, they're both competitive, but Georgia Tech's the harder school to get into. And even that it's easier in-state, almost all of the pressure that comes to the admission office, like, I can't believe this kid didn't get in, blah, 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 blah. Almost all of that is coming in-state. It's like the alumni who, we're a fourth generation, how did you not, like, this is all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a good PR move. All that pressure is coming at you in-state, and it's a really good signal to your in-state crowd who are paying the bills. And as a state flagship, you primarily exist to serve your own state. It's a really good signal to them to say, let me tell you how we're going to prioritize you. You're going to find out first. We're going to put you in your own category and prioritize you first. So it's kind of really good PR for like in-state relations with all the powers that be, everything from schools to, even trustee members, but certainly, parents and all the different constituencies. And so I'm actually surprised that more people don't do it for just for that reason alone. Do you feel any of those reasons played a role at all in you guys moving to the in-state notification first?
Totally. Yeah. We want to send the message loud and clear that we are here first and foremost to serve the students of our great state, and they are our priority, and we want to give them the smoothest experience through the CU admissions process as possible. Yeah.
This has been great, Kate. I kind of like it when we jump around and give, cover topics like this. According to our survey, our listeners kind of like it sometimes when we just hit the mic and talk about stuff. So I know we covered quite a few topics here. And
good.
On Thursday's episode, we'll have the third and final part on deferrals. I am looking at different policies different schools have when it comes to what they want the student to do once they get the deferral notice. So that's what we'll be talking about. Susan will join me for a question from a listener. It's a mom from the Northeast, and she wants to know if her kid should reveal if they're low income to a need blind college. Does that hurt? Does it help? Is it a non-factor? By the way, friends, in a bizarre coincidence, this question from this Northeast listener is question 605, and you guessed it, it'll appear on episode 605. As for a college spotlight, we're going to Massachusetts for a brand new interview. It's with Susan Bryson, the director of admission at Olin College of Engineering. And friends, when I dropped Joy off at college, I was trying to leave her with something kind of profound, like just after, like the kiss and say goodbye, like just that last drop off, not just kind of like pack the bags and pull them up to the dorm room part, like your final words. And at the time, I didn't even know that Jim Rohn was the person behind it, but I left her with those words. I said, Joy, show me your friends. I'll show you your future. Show me the 5 people you hang out with the most, and I'll show you exactly what you're going to be and who you're going to become. And friends, I leave you with the same charge today. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stalionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.